War industry success in defeating Germany and Japan then led to capture of America's future with the bomb and also massive conventional war business. Captains of industry strode into Roosevelt's and Truman's inner circles to implement a 100-year, $50 trillion march to World War III, designing the all-important propaganda of brilliantly self-creating fear and manufactured danger to herd the American taxpayer. Our own arsenals and wars were merely a high ceiling. Our world #1 weapons business reached for the stars, equipping 200 wars in the next 75 years. Our enormous contribution to 60 million war deaths in that time. Ask yourself what percentage of Earth's murder and heartache are caused by allowing business into government. Want to be a superhero? More killing we don't need. Stop the killing. That's what you do. Not by begging the greedy, implacable, fully supplied warriors, but by confiscating their money and weapons. Hello? Domestic spending and borrowing also remain skewed to industry profits, which government regulation and staffing are also designed to support against every conceivable public interest and need, especially solvency, safety, and survival. The vast majority of the entire scammin' boondoggle driven and lubricated by the commercially motivated campaign contribution scheme. With your help, my think tank's gonna write the book. Company by bucks, by politician, by ripoff. We'll slam it down in court and break the exhibit table. For 55 years, all of our war deaths and a large percentage of our individual poverty happened as a direct consequence of tens of trillions of dollars funneled into the coffers of bribing oligarchs, diverted to buy elective, aggressive invasion wars. Money denied for decades to its rightful owners for our potentially egalitarian trickle-down high employment economy. $18 trillion of which now crushes our national budget, a $600 billion annual service-demanding debt. Also to be crushed are our children and grandchildren facing depression and forced to obey our permanent war tradition against raging enemy fires we set. At least their solution to retirement insolvency is at hand: unsurvivable nuclear war. I've read many histories of our World War weapon buying and selling. Similar war industry corruption captured the leaders of every mega world power in history. Even if nobles forcing peasants to cough up possessions and march off to war, or vassals trading favors with the king to help each ride the backs of mere people, losing everything not yet stolen in battles to deliver spoils to the entitled, were mere variations on the same theme. Our labor and money flows to them, and our hopes, future, and blood into the ground. The great historian Arnold Toynbee reported that 15 of the great expansionist megapower empires of history, each endlessly warring everywhere, everyone continued attacking until debt and economic death hollowed out even their pointless, overextended, violent power, until infuriated enemies, long abused, finally swept in to crush the guilty tyrants and innocent citizens alike. America's trajectory is identical, despite our claim that we only range 8,000 to 12,000 miles away to defend corrupt military leaders of greatest virtue against regional rebels of utter evil. Tyranny designs all war, then prepared and fought with unlimited building of commerce in weapons and capture of leaders' motives and people's minds to grow and inflict huge armies for foreign invasion and civilian death beyond soldiers' defeat. Please understand that my every speech is your only single, precise, workable response. Our opposition to his stories, past, present, and future genocide. Stop the bribery that buys the lies and slash down to its total legal defeat and elimination the commercial freedom and autonomy to build and wreak swollen arsenals of weapons of mass destruction, unearthly or conventional, upon us all without mercy. Throughout the Mideast and many other countries, corrupt military dictatorial governments confront and defeat, for now, peaceful democratic opposition, giving rise to equally corrupt militant revolution, often sectarian, patriarchal perversions of Islam. Shockingly, the most renowned of originally democratic revolutions abandoned support of the Arab Spring freedom movement to help corrupt, undemocratic military leaders incite, then weakly resist, other bigoted, authoritarian rebel warriors. Imagine instead our last and next quarter centuries actually promoting overseas the nonviolent democratic middle or true human heart, instead of incessantly stacking, igniting, and fanning the dry timbers of ISIS-style revolution. Imagine us encouraging with patience and humility the tough generational struggle towards peace and democracy, those inseparable partners. Still a long, heart-rending, setback-ridden slog, but with hope everlasting. But no, we claim to promote peace at the points of our guns. We can't imagine leading by democratic, nonviolent example. Imagine 180 helpers like you and I, writing the arguments for one lawyer's appeal in the federal court of each national signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Your honors, we are pledged to work with all the others, especially those bomb possessors and preparers for total nuclear disarmament. Well, guess what? For 50 years since, we've either done no such thing or the exact opposite. So we lied, abrogated our treaty, did our presidents, congresses, and to be honest, we, the apathetic, neglectful people too. That treaty was sworn to by our parents for our children. So finally remembering our duty to fight against murder and suicide of humanity, we are demanding that you make our executives and legislators stop breaking and start obeying and implementing our single most critical constitutional law of everyone's history. We are to do everything we can to get rid of nukes together, even while some of those other signatories balk and delay. You must now order us to try, keep trying, and never stop trying, which obviously means work against corruption and conventional militarism too. Why must we get busy destroying weapons in wars of mass destruction, your honors? Because that's the law. The problem with that law is its lack of specific instructions on the what and when of 180 nations leading each other to our eventual required total nuclear disarmament. Although this deficit of detail is no argument to disregard the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty's binding commitment to steadily destroy every nuclear bomb and bomb plan of every signatory. Virtually every nation that advances nuclearism in violation of their pledge prefers instead to allow bribery of their leaders by nuclear industries unable to compete in the marketplace, instead collecting public billions as their bribery's quid pro quos. Our reward, impending meltdowns and nuclear wars. As the larger weapons and wars business keeps blowing up the perfect storm of corruption, aggression, and paranoia, the pervasive ignoring of the lofty requirement and goal of our treaty, with its less than stark and mandatory blueprint, is not a disappointing setback so much as it is masterful sabotage. So how do we fight back? We've been all over the answer from speech one. Leaders legally required to cut business out of the public trust. Then we find and elect new leaders humane, not insane. They can no longer just help themselves and cronies to private profits from public theft and harm. That's how to save the world, how to make our leaders loving, just, and peaceful. Your honors enforce our disobeyed role in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, require our leaders to continue advancing responsive disarmament work, with every other nation also recommitting to the treaty, including using necessary diplomatic and economic leverage against holdouts, endangering everyone by refusing their treaty obligation for this same work. Eventually, this progress will pressure even the few nations who had not signed the treaty to join for domestic, political, and economic rewards. Included in our appeal would be your order that our leaders and negotiators report to this court annually on our matching and progressing our disarmament progress with actual communications and negotiations with each signatory aiding or, in fact, hindering our efforts. Also, the people's lawyer must endorse or criticize the government's progress, and the court responds with supervision as needed. Someday, an uncorrupted executive of a less militarized nation may be trusted to continue carrying out the people's will, to work sincerely and fully for each year's progress on this progressive world weapon of mass destruction disarmament treaty. Until then, his or her hand will be held most firmly by this court. Just as Counsel for the People will never hear the end of nation-by-nation research contributed by you indefatigable how to save the world nutcases. That the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty requires elimination of nuclear power also is beyond debate. Nuclear power always builds bomb explosives. No nuclear bombs, by definition, means no nuclear power plants. Remember history. 10,000 years of goofball peace wimps whining. Keep every economic incentive to, legal allowance of, and industrial freedom to build vast, deadly arsenals. Just, pretty please, don't. We promise to keep this court apprised of our efforts to request the clean new executives and legislators you make possible, to also negotiate a conventional weapons and armies treaty, to reduce with the world to mutually appropriate border defenses entirely below capacity for foreign invasion. Ongoing progress directly fueled by your elimination of bribery and true beginning of our nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And that, boys and girls, is how we end, not with warm wishes, but with cold, hard, but loving constitutional law, his story's nasty habit of exporting masses of invasion soldiers, using tons of weapons for mass murder of continents full of innocents for no good reason. Thank your honors for my time of argument, not a minute more than the government defenders. I trust that your bribery, public campaign finance, treaty adherence, and the people's and legislators' war power rulings will be based on the ethical and constitutional strength of each side's arguments. Our and their time and repetition of advocacy being equal. Unlike the government's defense of corporate advantage, hint, hint, rule for us. I promise that I won't tell anybody other than a few stray internet listeners that one of you will probably let slip something to the little woman after y'all say grace before supper. She'll ask, "So what did you and your colleagues decide today?" You might say, "We decided to save our Constitution, defend America, save the world, but most of all, give you, me, and our children long, happy lives." She'll probably say, "Yes, dear. Do you think you can?" You might tell her, "Look, I could be the swing vote on those rulings, and there are some good people behind me that aren't going to stop until we get this done." And you might appreciate how and why we recovered our humanity. What happened, honey? Well, each of us men remembered who makes us happy, whole, and human. We realized that public law must match and obey the laws of God, love, women, and children. As Bertrand Russell said, remember your humanity and forget the rest. Your own history and memory of many dealings with fully motivated sales and commerce professionals. They work hard to sell, but generally look out for the buyer too, because most are basically decent, and robbing folks doesn't help word-of-mouth reputation in the private sector and market. But it's public government men sitting on those tax trillions, not volunteered only for fair, economical, peaceful government, but paid by force for whatever our leaders claim is best for us, but in hidden truth is more often than not diverted to their own advantage. These are the opportunists who grab as much of your loot as fast as their hands can shovel, best arranged with lies of stupendous size, intensity, and patriotic magnificence. The age-old assumption that we can't stop them, they got us over our own barrel, denies the obvious. Unlimited taxes? Cap 'em. Political gifts worth stealing for? Stop 'em. Arsenal piling freedom? End it. Constitution and treaties flouted? Obey 'em or go to jail. We're broke and dead without reform. Bosses too dirty to care. Your turn. Get on it. Too many words required. Go. Now. A million planets now charcoal. They didn't. The propaganda key to unrestrained weapons production is the arsenal advocates' claim that guns don't kill people, people kill people. Mostly with guns. Never cut weapon supply, they insist, because responsible people only desiring self-defense, so vital in the world full of guns that so inspires them, must exercise the claimed constitutional right of every single soul to brandish deadly force. That you believe, 'cause you ain't read the Constitution, which only authorizes the militia commanded by the U.S. President, not every single citizen, to fire away until we kill more of each other than we lost in our history of war, including our aggressive, elective, unnecessary, grossly overarmed ones. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. Tell me something. Do you make a habit of accepting wisdom and truth from promoters and salesmen of the products in question? Now, if it is just people who kill people in the same huge numbers, whether armed to the teeth or just up to their toenails, that would legitimize, validate, and verify all those peace experts who advise us to teach, negotiate with, and beg folks to pretty please start feeling more peaceful while they stay weaponized to the moon. Fingers clenched around triggers, buddies poised to feed in 1,000-round 50 caliber bandoliers. But you see, unless fallen into the claws of the villains you hate, weapons are utterly harmless. In fact, magnificent builders of security and justice. World War leaders and the peace wimps they brainwashed both tell us that nigh on infinite numbers of and power of arsenals didn't diminish a bit of that lovely peace they promise. Never mind that of every 10 years they spend stacking bombs, 9 or more are also devoted to planting them on people's heads, soldiers and civilians alike. I wish just one little person with a little moxie and imagination would visit a pair of rival gangs, militias, or other warring factions during one of their itty-bitty ceasefires and jot down a negotiations diary. Here's my example, properly cynical and sardonic. Monday, combatants restraining selves and talking peace. Tuesday, opponents count and oil 1,000 guns apiece. Each buys another 100 and replaces all ammo lost in enemy soldiers and civilians' exploded hearts and brains. Wednesday, the enemies imagine for about 1/10 of a second a generation of unbroken peace, while every finger still itches and twitches on every trigger. Thursday, as Wednesday's flicker of peace planning amid such panting, slavering technical temptation was, as always, snuffed out by weaponry's chosen windstorm, today they obsess all 24 hours about soon pulling every trigger until everything that breathes on or behind enemy lines is ripped to bloody shreds. Friday, oops, one bullet is fired. Surprise, surprise. Then, just like my alcoholic relapses, slam, bam, 10,000 more. Bullets and bombs, I mean, or recalling 7th grade world history, arrows and spears for 10,000 years. Saturday, enemies were defeated or depleted while perfectly good guns and piles of ammo remained. Animosity's habit and killing tools imperatives made locating new enemies essential, not to mention easy and fun. Sunday, each pack goes to church and thanks our partial, vengeful, sectarian, or racist God for being on our side. Monday, end of diary, unchanged and pointless for the next decade or 5, because obviously the continued, lavish, profitable weapons supply and soldier hiring cannot be idly wasted or ever stopped. People can and should be wasted until they run out, but never what warriors love most, their weapons. For example, every full history of nuclear weapons reports that the preeminent long-term motive of American war leaders for the frying of civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was not the defeat of the already surrendering Japanese, but to intimidate and terrorize our next enemy, Russia, with the horror, glory, victory, and rule of our new ultimate weapons. Early in August of 1945, President Harry Truman was embroiled in tough negotiations with Russia. He was struggling to corral the new, victorious Asian and European Soviet power with Uncle Sam's rules for an American century. An aide brought him the secret report of the first atomic test blast in the New Mexico desert and the imminent readiness of 2 more bombs to prove our nuclear monopoly in blood before we allowed the Japanese to surrender. "This is the greatest thing in history!" exclaimed Harry. Savagery is greatness, you ask? Wait a minute. Okay, how about 30 seconds? Every empire builder in his story has forced the world to agree that more terror and death from greater military power against more combatants and innocents than were ever slaughtered before defines his greatness and glory. And yours too, long as you wave his flag, your money, and also waive, W-A-I-V-E, your right to live. And do you recall that almost every historian's macho celebration sings this same tune? The more evil and powerful our weapons, deployed by more potent and long-range armies, the greater psychological impetus and demand they force upon their proud owners, requiring fulfillment, exactly as designed upon any and all masses of bodies, intending maximum grief throughout an enemy's non-martial ranks, even more than the misery its professional army and scheming government are trained to endure. The bigger the weapons, the more they demand total war, defined as the limitless and coercive blood of women and children. They will settle, however, in a pinch for only driving millions, wounded or merely destitute, out of their homes. Just as arsenals, ever growing in numbers and power, drive barbarism and massive endless wars, both physically and psychologically, disarmament is the legal, physical, emotional, and spiritual key to peace everlasting. Hasn't every other peace theory proved false 10,000 times? War is the rending of flesh by weapons freely made and sold. Peace is the protection of us by outlawing most weapons manufacture for certain deployment and inevitable use. So you see, peace ain't rocket science. But war sure as hell is. Of course, weapons have no evil, scheming brains. They are inanimate, unconscious things. Exactly as the NRA clever deceptively insists in argument that you must never, never support any limitations to such harmless little fuzzballs. Thank you, Rush. But spears, guns, and bombs are made to be sold, to kill people with, and be replaced for additional profit. They are bought by the hundreds of millions by government agents who coerce citizens for the money. Leaders personally profit from weapons purchase and use for killing designated enemies and, oh, so regrettably, their and our citizens too. While teaching all citizens to desire their use in endlessly recurring wars of choice and aggression masquerading as necessity and defense, leaders also incite in themselves the emotional habit or need of killing. Easy enough for men often genetically skewed to seek the biggest taking and killing jobs to be found on the planet. We gon' decommission them jobs. Everyone. Excuse me, lost my place. Such psychic satisfaction helps fuel their drive for military and political power continuously gained from warring with those weapons, which realizes, continues, and augments their financial gains in concert with commercial conspirators, public parasite, oligarch, killer, cronies, all. Let's look at an example of conventional, not nuclear weapons, psychological as well as mercenary encouragement to productive use. Another giant lie, of course, as the entire purpose and effect of weapons so bound to be used is destruction, not construction. In the 1950s, in response to leftist and communist rebellions, America massively prepared for counter-revolutionary wars. Then our vast new fleets of troop transport planes, bombers, helicopters, and guerrilla fighting forces impelled Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon to ever expand our massive jungle war on the other side of the world. An ideal test and profitable, productive use of our new monster invasion army. And they prospered. And 55,000 American boys died, and generations grieved, went insane, or both. As always, before and during each new war, our leaders tell all victims, enemy and our own, that we are ultimately only enforcing a grand, just, permanent, victorious peace for and over foreigners who are our responsibility, not their own. The 20-year Vietnam horror killed 55,000 of us and 2 million of them, and wounded, aggrieved, or drove insane and or destitute perhaps 50 times as many Americans. Finally, we could not destroy resistance from people battling from their own huts and rice paddies, nor encourage corrupted men hiding behind mountains of American weapons and cash. So we lost. Fortunately, our leaders were not defeated at all. Our eventual ejection after infinite tragedy was all perfectly acceptable collateral damage while achieving the real objective, hundreds of billions of profits for a couple of thousand power players. Since then, in several smaller but still horrific wars, mercenary tragedy still rules. And the wrecking of our economy, bodies, hearts, souls, and lives? Again, not their problem. Just yours, suckers. A real United Nations after World War II would have simply, massively, and permanently encouraged each nation through progressive treaties to clamp down on bribery and weapons. Patriarchy's world destruction strategy in 2 words: bribery and weapons. The ensuing nuclear arms race to Armageddon and the 60 million slaughtered since the Big War, caused by refusing to end his story, neither could have happened with those 2 basic human laws in progressive effect against bribery and excess weapons. At risk of dismissal as a Looney Tunes of gibbering grandiosity, I'm still forced to ask, are these little chit-chats our last chance? Or am I a legend in my own mind? The God of the Old Testament, when finally sick to death of Saul slaying his thousands and David his tens of thousands, laid down the only law ever devised to stop war. Thou shalt pound thy swords into plowshares. Every other peace theory, proven ridiculous 10,000 times in years, proposes to keep every weapon and corrupt financing scheme, but adopt my sweet inspired philosophy and pretty please don't use them. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse ride together to lie, steal, and kill with unlimited weapons. To lasso our hell-bound mounts for good, make your loving family truths a public legal program. Make politicians honest. Protect our treasury. Reduce weapons to defense only. A good church reminds us of holy human commandments, especially thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not kill. But only our essential government, dominated by and not crushing us people, enforces those commandments upon leaders and constituents alike. Judges, your order that the world's #1 stupid power destroy bombs instead of spread them will stimulate, with our help, the international reforms at the heart of the refurbished Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and a new swords into plowshares and family love government revolution. And the world will someday be one. And the world will someday be one.